What is going on, gunfighters? Are you excited about a brand new episode of Gunfighter Life? By God's grace, I got an idea for a lot of episodes. State of this caliber in 2024. Just kind of like the State of the Union address, but for a caliber. What's the state of, 9mm in 2024? What's the state of, 5.56, 308, 40 Smith & Wesson? I don't know if I'm going to do all those calibers, but you get the idea. I'm excited to get you guys some new content because I've been doing a lot of tactical reload episodes because I've been professionally gunfighting to make some money while this podcast, God willing, becomes a full-time income. If you want to make that happen, if you want to be part of that, check out the Patreon link in the show notes. With that, welcome to Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, calibers, the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Let's hit up this bio, and then we'll get into the main topic. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I don't apologize for that. God is number one in my life. I grew up hunting and fishing in the backwoods of the southeastern United States at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories are with firearms. I joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. By God's grace, He got me through that safely. After that, I served as an instructor, an urban warfare instructor, and a desert warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. I also served with the LAPD, both full-time as a sworn police officer and some more specialized assignments, as well as serving in the U.S. Army, full-time and part-time National Guard. I've been a FBI firearms instructor, still am an FBI firearms instructor, have been for a lot of years. Also NRA certified and some other three-letter government agency certified. I've been a private contractor for a three-letter government agency I won't specify. I've been the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. By God's grace, He got me through all that in one piece, not because I'm better, but because He chose to have grace and mercy on me. I've been a professional hunter and guide. Professionally hunted things like buffalo and elk. Not many people today can say they've done that, but I'm blessed to be able to say that I have. I've hunted everything from white-tailed deer on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast to gray squirrel on the East Coast to prairie dog on the West Coast and elk and bear and wolf and slain all manner of beast. A state rifle and pistol champion a few times over in a few different disciplines. Now those experiences, it's not because I'm bigger or badder. Certainly not bigger. In fact, I met one of the patrons in real life, and he said something to the effect of, "I thought you'd be bigger." Reminded me of that William Wallace movie, where he's like, "Oh yeah, if William Wallace were here, he'd shoot lightning bolts out of his rear end." Well, I'm not William Wallace, but I am the person that did all those things in the bio. But not because I'm bigger or badder. I don't think that I survived when many other young good men did not. I give all the glory and all the credit to God, all the talents and experiences that He's given me and the things that He's let me live through. I hope to use them to glorify God and to help you today. So if I boast in anything, it's not in my strength, it's in that God had mercy on me and saved me because He had a purpose for me. And hopefully I can use those talent, skills, and abilities to serve you today. What is going on, gunfighters? State of the Cartridge, 357 Magnum. One of the greats, right? That's what we're going to talk about today. The 357 Magnum. State of the Cartridge address in 2024. Now, I'm doing this from memory, but came about in around the 50s. The 38 Special had been around a lot longer, and there was the 38-44, which was basically a 44 size revolver, as I understand it, but chambered in 38, so you had a lot more cylinder thickness, back before metallurgy what it is today, and you could load those rounds hotter. You could load pretty hot 38 specials, because here's the deal. If you've ever reloaded for 38 357, then you know, right, with most powders, there's way more case than you need powder. So 38 Special was designed way back from black powder days, and you can load it with black powder, but modern smokeless powder it takes up much less volume than black powder does. So you don't need anywhere near that amount of volume. You don't do this, but you could load the same amount of powder that you load in a 357 Magnum for almost any load into a 38 Special. You don't need that extra length. They made that case longer not to hold more powder, but so that somebody wouldn't take one of these hot 357 Magnums and put it in an old 38 Special, Colt Detective Special or something, and blow their hands up, blow their face up. They did it for a litigious society. They did it so they didn't get sued, so they didn't blow guns up. They made that case a little bit longer. And that may be confusing, but 38 Special is not actually 38 caliber. It's .357 caliber, same as 357 Magnum. It's a lengthened 38 Special. But although it's only a little bit longer, it's operating by different rules. It's got a lot more velocity. I mean, a lot more velocity. If you're talking 38 Specials, usually subsonic, under 1,000 feet a second. You're talking about hot 357s up into the 1,450 feet per second. You're talking not a marginal, but a significant step up in power. It's a big difference. It's like talking about the difference between 7.62 by 39 and 308. Like, yeah, they're both 30 caliber bottleneck rifle rounds, but one's an intermediate and one's a proper full-powered rifle round. You talk about 38 Special 357 Magnum. One is pretty standard, vanilla, plain Jane, I would consider adequate defensive handgun cartridge. The 38 Special is not a bad cartridge, especially if you like the heavier, slower bullet. But 357 Magnum is a proper Magnum. It is a Magnum. It is a powerful, powerful cartridge. Now, it's a powerhouse. It is a straight-up powerhouse. When it was released, it quickly gained a reputation for being a man stopper, for being a stopper of men. And it is. It deserves that reputation. It is probably the best of commonly carried cartridge calibers for a handgun. Again, don't think that it's just as good as a rifle or a shotgun. It is not. But for a handgun cartridge, it's a beast. And it's one that can commonly be carried. There are more powerful handgun cartridges, the 41 Magnum, the 44 Magnum, but they're not commonly carried. Some people may carry a 44 Magnum sometimes, but very rarely does somebody carry one all the time. So, of commonly carried cartridges, probably the king of what you might call stopping power, round per round effectiveness. It is great for that, and it was commonly carried for a long time by law enforcement in this country. It was a mainstay for a while. A lot of people still carry 38 Special, but many people, many law enforcement for a time, for an epoch in American history, carried 357 Magnum, and it's a beast. It's a good for that, and it's kind of common cartridges, the biggest and baddest that you can carry in a reasonable size frame. I'm talking a K-frame, L-frame type revolver, and I know you can get some 44 mags in those, but it's not common. The 357 Magnum, you can have it in a revolver, in a what I would call a modern fighting revolver. That's not comically big. There are these comical cartridges. That's what I'm going to call them, and that's going to be like your 500 Smith & Wesson, your 460. The things that are in like an X frame, just ridiculously big. Like, it's a handgun in name only. You might as well carry a rifle slung on your shoulder. They're so big. But the 357 Magnum is not that. You can get, a 4-inch GP100 if you want like the most, like probably what I would consider the GP100 like your best value and really good option. But there's many options. Smith & Wesson, Ruger, Colt that make a good 357 Magnum fighting size revolver that's not in the realm of ridiculousness for most people to carry. If they're going to carry something like a full-size fighting handgun, they would carry something like a 4-inch 357 Magnum revolver. And it's got good power. And it's a good round. It's perhaps the best round for a crossover cartridge in a revolver. You'd argue that the 10 millimeter might be the best for a semi-auto, but 357 is probably the best crossover for a revolver, rimmed revolver round for hunting and defense. Call it a crossover cartridge. Something you would hunt with, and I have, carried for animal defense, for those kinds of things, and for people defense. 357 Magnum is a great crossover. Again, you can get it in carryable, and you could argue that somebody's like, oh, I carry a 500 Smith & Wesson that weighs 7 pounds. Okay, but I'm talking about common, what most people are going to carry. I'm talking in like the 30-ish something ounces range for a proper, man size, not a little #MeToo carry gun. It's in that realm, and it's a good gun for that, and it's a good crossover gun, and it's a good hunting gun, right? 357 Magnum is a good hunting round. Again, before all these big, ridiculous Magnums came out, it was like the king of handgun cartridges for hunting for a while. Everything from polar bears to grizzly bear to all manner of things have been taken with the 357 Magnum. And if more is better to you, some people are just the more is always better. You're going to be like, well, 44 Magnum is the best. And there are a few carryable size 44 Magnums, but they're pretty rare. Most are not. And you get more recoil. So although round per round it's more effective, shot recovery time is more. And in my experience, if you get a decent sized, again, that 4-inch, steel, I prefer stainless steel frame, medium size revolver, the recoil in a 357 Magnum is not nothing, but it's not crazy. You get a similar weighted 44 Magnum, and it is considerable increase in recoil. So round per round more effective, yes. More effective just for hunting, yes, for sure. There's no doubt that round per round, let's say you shoot 2 deer, both at 75 yards, one with the 357 Magnum, one with the 44 Magnum, round per round, unless you just get really poor choice in bullet quality, the 44 is going to be more effective. But we're not talking about that. We're talking crossover round. For a crossover round, the 357 Magnum is better, because if you got two guys, you've just been out hiking or scouting a berry patch, or you've been out reconnoitering for your hunting season, and you come back to your truck and there's two guys trying to break into your truck and steal stuff, shot recovery time from one guy to the next, if you decide that deadly force is warranted there because, they point a gun at you and you discover them or whatever, shot recovery time is a big deal. Transition time for controlling recoil, that could be a big deal. Although you might think that 357 Magnum is just a crazy effective round, and it is pretty good for a handgun, you may still require multiple hits. And getting those hits on target quickly is important. So I think it's a good balance in controllable recoil. And I don't care how good you control recoil. I don't care how fast you can shoot a 500 Smith & Wesson. If you've reduced the recoil, you can shoot faster. That's how that works. That's how physics works. And you just can't argue with that. So 357 Magnum is great for that. And 357 Magnum is also great in carbines. You will gain in many loads, not a little bit, but quite a bit of combat effectiveness, quite a bit of power when you put it in a carbine length barrel. And unfortunately, with our laws, that's generally going to be 16 inches because most people aren't going to SBR a 357 Magnum. But there's some really good carbines in 357, and there have been over the years. And that can be a really good kind of crossover practical truck gun choice, especially if you live east of the Mississippi, or in the rainforests of the Pacific Northwest, where long shots just aren't really a thing. Or a lot of people they live in a state where their state trusts them apparently to own guns, but they don't trust them to hunt with a modern bottleneck cartridge. They don't trust them to follow, one of their safety rules of know your target and consider its background. And for those, there's all these kind of specialty Gucci straight-walled hunting cartridges nowadays, like the 350 Legend and the 400 Legend, and what is it, the 360 Buckhammer. But you know what? 357 Magnum out of a carbine will kill deer. And in those states, deer and black bear is probably the biggest thing you're going to run into. And 180 grain hard cast for those things is fantastic and more than enough. And 158 grain, let's say, semi-jacketed soft point, they're fantastic for deer. And you could get something if you just want to spend more money and throw money at something and get like one of these new straight-walled cartridges. But there's no reason you can't take deer at reasonable ranges with 357 Magnum out of a carbine. And it's still a good defensive gun, and it's way more common. Will 360 Buckhammer be around in 10 years? I don't know. Will 350 Legend be around in 10 years? I mean, somebody will probably load for it, just like they load for a 22 Hornet, which is not a bad cartridge. But go try and find a box of that at Walmart. Go try and find it at your local sporting goods store. 357 Magnum, I don't see going anywhere for a while. You know, if those straight wall states say, you know what, we really do trust our people to hunt with, you know, what I would call a modern cartridge that's been around for 120 years, a bottleneck Spitzer round, we're actually going to trust our people to do the right thing and let them hunt with, you know, modern technology, then those cartridges may go away. And maybe not go away completely, but they may be like a special order item. 357 Magnum is pretty common, and I concede it's probably going to stay pretty common. And I think in 2024, it's going to continue to be strong. It's going to continue to be a standard go-to cartridge. Revolvers actually are seeing a bit of a resurgence. And lever actions are seeing a bit of a resurgence. And the 357 Magnum does well on both those platforms. And therefore, by proxy, I think the 357 Magnum will see a bit of a resurgence as a lot of the, what I would call, and I'm not putting this down, I kind of like this. For a long time, it was just black rifles and Glocks, black rifles and Glocks. And a lot of, I think, the newer generation have kind of been expanding, broadening their horizons, whether it's just to, you know, for the millennials to have a hipster gun or whatever. They're like, oh, what about the revolver? And revolvers are great. For most people, for most things, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have a semi-auto. I'm carrying a semi-auto. I'm carrying a full-size fighting handgun. By God's grace, I make my living in this world with a Bible and a gun, and the most common gun on my hip is a semi-auto full-size fighting handgun. However, for a lot of things, a good medium-size 357 Magnum is not a bad choice. I don't hold to the myth that revolvers are more reliable than semi-autos. They malfunction, and a lot of times catastrophically. I would say they have their strengths and weaknesses. I would say they're probably about equal. They just have certain foibles, just like semi-autos do. And whatever you have, you should train with it. But I would never put somebody down, even in 2024, if they had a good, if their normal carry gun was a medium-size 357 Magnum revolver, and they train with it. That's the caveat. Right, I'll take the guy with the medium size, old school iron sight, 4-inch GP100 that trains with it. That goes and shoots I-Corps. That goes and shoots, IDPA in the revolver division. That actually goes to training courses and learns how to fight with a revolver. I give that guy more kudos than the guy that's got the brand new, crazy Gucci Glock with all the stuff and the light and the rail and the Kydex holster that doesn't trade. They go to the indoor range and shoot a silhouette at 7 yards and say, oh, I'm training. You're checking a box is what you're doing. So I'll take the guy with the revolver that actually trains over that other guy. So I'm not saying it's better, but I'm saying if a guy has a medium-sized revolver and 357 Magnum and actually gets on it and trains with it in 2024, I think that's fantastic. I'm all for it. And some people just gravitate towards the revolver, right? And if that is that person, then that's fine. And the 357 Magnum, again, is a fantastic cartridge. And there's a lot of states that are infringing. And I'm not just talking about the straight-walled hunting states. I'm talking about many states have that, they think that if I shoot somebody with a 7-round magazine, that's okay. But if I shoot somebody with a 15-round magazine in my gun, that's somehow horrible. The shooting should be justified. It should be righteous or unrighteous based on the merits of the case and what the adversary was doing, not based on how many rounds were in the gun. However, there are some states that are like that, and if you are unfortunate enough to live in one of those states and you're not willing to move, 357 Magnum, 6 or 7 shots, and there are 8 shots, right? There are revolvers, and not uncommonly, that hold 7 shots of 357 Magnum. 7 shots, 357 Magnum is a good loadout, especially when you consider that you could only have 10 of anything. 7 shots of 357 Magnum is an intriguing option. I'm not saying it's the best option. I'm not saying it's the only option. I'm not saying it's right for you. I'm saying if you can only have, 10 rounds or less, 7 rounds of 357 Magnum is intriguing. And it's, again, I wouldn't put you down for choosing it. As long as you train with it and you run it, not you just have one and you think it's cool and you think it's the best thing since sliced bread because you like revolvers and you like Gucci, pretty, exotic leather holsters. There's nothing wrong with an exotic leather holster, but you have better training with it. There are guys that have revolvers, I think, as, ooh, look at me, I'm carrying a gun, just like people have the Gucci Glocks and don't train with them and say, ooh, look at me, look at my gun. But not a bad choice. I'm not saying it's the best choice, but in 2024, it's still a viable option. And I guess that's my summation of the 357 Magnum in 2024. It's still a viable option. It's still a good choice. It's a great round, and it continues to be so. With that, I'm going to start wrapping up. State of the Caliber Address, 357 Magnum in 2024. Tactical tip of the day. We mentioned the 357 Magnum in a carbine. Just because something is a good defensive choice in a handgun does not mean that it will be a good defensive choice in a carbine. You are gaining a lot of velocity, and bullet technology and defensive handgun bullet technology is a lot of times based on velocity. Hollow points are velocity based for expansion. If you don't believe me, take a hollow point out of your gun and drop it on the table. It will not expand. I don't care how cheap and garbage a hollow point is, it will not expand at that velocity. There needs to be a certain velocity at which it expands. And the rate at which the bullet expands and penetrates are adversely related. Meaning, the more it expands, the more rapidly it expands, the less it will penetrate. Because it has greater frontal diameter. It has to displace more tissue, and it slows it down. Kind of like a parachute. When it expands, it rapidly slows down. Think of the same, not nearly the same kind of velocities and rules and frontal diameter, but similar thing happens with the parachute and a hollow point bullet. When it expands, it slows down. And you might think, well, if I shoot it out of a carbine, I'm getting way more velocity. More is better. America, more is always better. Supersize it. Big gulps. More is better. But if you get above a certain amount of velocity, that bullet may expand too rapidly. And you may get way too much expansion and too little penetration because it expands so much, or it completely fragments, which might sound good. Like there's always the next, well, there's not always, but there's a lot of latest and greatest. They think they've reinvented the wheel when they look at this new super light for caliber, super high velocity round. And you're like, yeah, we've tried that before. I look at a Glazer safety slug. But let's go back to your deer hunting with your carbine, and you might think this Spear Gold Dot is a great choice for a revolver for defense, and it might be. 125 grain Spear Gold Dot 357 Magnum is a good street proven load, and a revolver for people. Out of a carbine for a deer, it would not be my first choice, right? It's probably going to rapidly overexpand, and whether it penetrates well enough or not really would depend on whether it hits a rib or not, whether it hits a shoulder bone or not, right? So the tactical tip is pay attention to your barrel length. If you're running 357 Magnum in a little short snubby, you probably won't do it for very long. If you're running it in a, what I would say, medium-sized fighting handgun, a medium-sized frame revolver, you're going to want a certain load and bullet technology for that. If you're running it out of a carbine, you're probably going to want a completely different bullet technology for that. Something like we talked about, we aforementioned, a classic loading would be 158 grain semi-jacketed soft point, or 180 grain hard cast, or one of the older, even old school, semi-wad cutters. Tactical verse of the day: it is God who makes my way perfect. You make my feet like the feet of a deer and set me on high places. You teach my hands to make war, so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. It's part of Psalm 18. Thank you for listening, and have a blessed day.